Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Before we jump into everything, I want a quick shout out to our good friends, local 1220 IBEW out in Chicago. Our friends listening on WCPT 820 out in Chicago. Good on our listeners for making those phone calls, making it a little uncomfortable on the folks over at WTTW TV. A tentative agreement has been reached. Ratification votes coming, I guess, in the next day or so. We'll have better news. We'll have news then. But as of now, tentative agreement. Strike is going to come hopefully to an end, and hopefully the workers get what it is they were on the picket line fighting for, the dignity and respect that they earn. So good on John Rizzo and the folks there with IBEW Local 1220. Just wanted to get that out. And a quick shout out to our listeners out on AM 820 WCPT there in Chicago. Shows the power of our listeners to get involved and to take actions. Thanks so much for making those. So, if you're paying attention to what's going on in the world, we're really in a very interesting moment. It goes back to, the old labor frame, which side are you on? Because politically right now, it is very clear. 5 years, 10 years ago, you go, well, both political parties, they're exactly the same. You could have made an argument. Not right now. Right now, you've got the conservative Republican zealotry crowd really on a fringe. And there is a huge difference between the narrow-minded conservative vision for this country and our working class vision. And I think we saw that during the hearing of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. I think I think they showed themselves. I think they really, and they were unabashed about it. They came out and talked about that, they thought that the decision on Roe was wrong, and the decision in Griswold about contraception was wrong. And, well, they have this narrow-minded view of what families are. And yet, remember, these are the people who tell you that they're the party of family values, yet they want to define what a family is and what a family should be and how they should act. Basically saying, if you're not doing what we're doing, you're wrong. While telling us, and this is the brilliant part, while telling us we're going to get government out of your life. We want smaller, less intrusive government. And again, I go back to this family values thing, this decency thing. And the thing in Tennessee has just got my attention. Because, when people tell you who they are, the old Maya Angelou quote, when people tell you who they are, believe them. I've always believed the people who tell you who they are, that's who they are. And I look at what they're doing in Tennessee as right now. The Republicans in that state are trying to eliminate the age requirement for marriage. A couple years ago, they went and they changed that. You had a Republican governor who said, no, this is a little creepy. Maybe we should be protecting teenage girls. Maybe shouldn't do it. Now, understand, the legislature there in Tennessee is moving this legislation along as we speak, while the Republican megaphone, while the chaos merchants and the outraged candy factory is tweeting out pedophile and groomers and projecting like at no other time. Because it's those Democrats. And what they're doing, understand, they're pushing back against, Transgender Visibility Day, because they're mocking people who are living their lives. And I would go a step further. I think this is part of this bigger plan. This bigger plan to talk to the radical fringe of the party. Look, the Republicans have always had that crazy base. and they've always whistled at them and always, thrown them a wink and a nod every once in a while. Never wrapped their arms around and fully embraced them until recently. Now they are full on nuts. And QAnon and the Q kookery that you would expect to be on the distance is front and center. And this is a big part of that. So this isn't just about, hey, we're concerned about, what's happening with teenagers and, maybe they're going to make a bad choice, because we can have that conversation if you have to. If you really cared, and if you really cared, you wouldn't want a government policy telling what families have to do. You would want families to be able to make those decisions and give them the resources to work their way through and make actual informed decisions, which, look, nobody's jumping into this. But I look at this and I think a bigger part of this is about activating the crazy base into the next step. Not just tweeting, not just making angry statements, but actual engagement, actual physical violence. I fear that they're attempting to intimidate Judge Brown Jackson. I believe that this is a massive intimidation tactic. Now, what's interesting to me is, again, that projection. And we see this a lot out of the GOP. When they're doing stuff, they're claiming everybody else is doing it. And this is basic humanity. When you think about it, you go, who are the true pedophiles and groomers? Well, it's been the Republicans historically. I mean, Trump in his association with Jeffrey Epstein, and you go, yeah, but all these other, yeah, everybody. So you can't just go, it's the Democrats. It's a lot of people. And we should be weeding them out and dealing with the actual problem. But just saying, no, I had an email today from a guy who said, well, we're just saying it because it makes Democrats mad. So you're lying and defaming and cheapening for political points. And that's the answer, yeah. When there really are sexual abusers out there. I look at someone like Jim Jordan, who has covered up tons of sexual abuse while he was at Ohio State. I look at Matt Gaetz, who's accused of trafficking underage girls. We're not seeing much on that. I look at Ted Cruz, who's been taking photographs with a convicted child molester. I look at Roy Moore, who got banned from a shopping mall, going after teenage girls. Look at Mike Huckabee defending child molesters. Denny freaking Hastert, former Speaker of the House. Do you need any more? The Schmuck Dynasty guy, telling the Christian, the Christian getaway folks, you should be marrying 15 or 16-year-old girls because they can pluck ducks. What the freaking heck are you? What? And this is okay. This is conservative world, but this is the world that they live in. This is God-fearing country. This is evidently what they believe. And this is what they believe. This is the scary stuff. They want to make these beliefs, these twisted, bizarre, goofy beliefs. They want to turn this into legislation that the rest of us are forced to follow. Remember, same people who say, get government out of my life. We want smaller, less intrusive government for me. But for you, we're going to tell you and your family what you have to do. That's today's conservative movement. That's today's Republican Party. Now, I used to have some respect for old school conservatives who truly believed in smaller, less intrusive government. I used to have real respect for conservatives who believed in institutions, who didn't allow the state to have this kind of dictatorial, authoritarian power. I used to have respect for them. But these folks now who are using the states as the bludgeon instead of the safeguard, that's pure danger, folks. And these folks they're purely dangerous. I look at the fact that yesterday, and this is the scary part, you go, but they just have a different vision. Yeah, they do have a different vision. 63 of them voted against a resolution reaffirming our support for NATO. 63 of them. 63 of them voted against a resolution that urges our continued support, our unwavering support of Ukraine. as these people are fighting for their freedom, fighting for their sovereignty, fighting for their territorial integrity, their democratic future. 63 Republicans voted with Putin. And that's what this vote is. It's a vote with Putin. It was very simple. We support NATO. We support Ukraine. We support our president in his fight to help support NATO and Ukraine. And they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. Now you go, but Rick, the base, it's all because of the Q. And this is partially true. Partially, I agree. The base, the tail is wagging the dog at this moment. The radical fringe that they've been courting and wrapping their arms around and doing whatever it is that kooks do in the closet. Yeah, they're afraid of them. And I'm hoping at some point they have the courage to stand up and say, you know what, we've got to roll this back for the good of our nation. Now, you and me and the rest of us, the sane, the rational, we've now more than ever got to come together and go, what kind of a country do we want? Do we want a country where this radical fringe dominates policy, dominates the future, dominates what conditions our children are going to live under, what future we're going to hand off to the next generation and the generation after that? I hope not. And this is why, while we still can resolve to register and vote, and everybody look, I'm reaching out to my sane, rational Republicans. If you're still out there, if you haven't been completely brainwashed by the F channel and all of the right-wing propaganda, if you haven't been completely scrubbed of any critical thinking skill, look at how far from the party of Lincoln, how far from the party of Reagan, the party of Trump has veered from sanity. And ask yourself, is this what we want? Is this the future of the country that we want to move for our children? I mean, it's incredible to me. There was a Senate candidate in Ohio that his name is Mike Gibbons. And Mike had an interesting statement. And I believe it was focused. I believe they sat and they thought this out. This wasn't just an off-the-cuff kind of quip. I believe he thought this out. I believe they knew exactly who they were talking to. He said, diversity, equity, and inclusion are not American principles. And I got to tell you, I grew up believing, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The man should be, tested by his character, not by the color of his skin. Those kind of things, that the high ideal stuff. That anyone could come to this country and work hard, play by the rules, and succeed, no matter your race, your religion, no matter what. And yet, Mike here, not just dog whistling, I would argue bullhorning to the base. Because they want the kind of destructive policy that's moved us forward. Now, personally, I want that vision of America that I was sold. That if you work hard, you play by the rules, you get ahead. That meritocracy, that anyone can pull themselves up and do better. That you can lead a better life. You can go as far as your work ethic and your talents and your will take you. But sadly, we know that's not reality. And I want politicians who are going to fight for me, fight for things that are going to move us in the right direction. And thank goodness for Joe Biden, who today signed the Postal Reform Act that's going to make sure that our post office is going to be secure and in place for the next generation. Because we saw the last administration do what they can to destroy it. The fact that Joe Biden today stood up and said, you know what? There shouldn't be no intimidation in the workplace when workers want to join unions. There should be no coercion, no threats, no anti-union propaganda. He said, every worker should be free should have a free and fair choice to join a union. No employer can take that away. That's the kind of president I want. That's the kind of place I want. As he talked about, hey, that's how we build a prosperous working class. That's how we improve benefits. That's how we have safer, healthier workplaces. But instead, what do we got? We got conservative world, where workers continue to struggle and fight and fall behind. While our CEOs, and I love this story because it just infuriates me. I had never heard of Roblox until today, but evidently they did an IPO back in March of 21. That, big initial public offering, huge thing. The stock now is down 30% off of that IPO, and its CEO has done very well. Thank you very much. In fact, he pocketed a cool $232.8 million for the year. Now, he's in that place that, Joe Biden has said, hey, we need to be taxing these people who are making over $100 million. He's one of those. In fact, there have been a couple of them in the $200 million club. Discovery CEO David Zaslav, he made $246 million. Amazon's Andy Jassy, $212 million. Activision Blizzard CEO Bobby Kotick, $200 million, even though they laid off 50 employees. There's a bunch of these guys out there who I'm sure aren't paying the same tax rate that their workers are paying. But this guy at Roblox, this David Bazucki, $232.8 million in it for a company that has lost 30% of its stock, yet he makes over almost 1,700 times what the average worker makes. That ain't the vision for this country that I have. I'd like to see it back to where it was when my grandparents were around, where he'd be making, 20, 30 times, not 1,700. But that's just me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or share your thoughts, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. If you're just joining us, make sure you grab the podcast. Take the program on the go wherever you go and never miss a moment. Make sure you share with your friends. Always there whenever you need it. Right back. Stick around. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. Generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as we said the other day, there's a Fox, a study out on the Fox channel, and they paid a bunch of people to watch CNN, and what they found is the more people watch CNN, the more informed they were, and the less likely they were to believe lies and BS. Gee, who would have thunk it? Oh, I don't know. Any sane, rational person? But now there are the studies out there to prove it. Let's go to the phone lines. Got Alice on line 1. Alice, how are you today?
I'm fine. How about yourself?
I am good. What's on your mind?
Well, you were talking about Tennessee, and I have a friend that lives in Tennessee. She moved from our area about 15 years ago, and she has become brainwashed. So I think Tennessee has really gone over the edge. But they're not the only state that has these child marriage laws. Kentucky does.
Yep.
It's totally insane because on one hand you're going, no, wait a minute. What's the difference between, what is the definition here of child marriage, according to y'all, and I'm talking about the Republicans, and what is your definition of being a pedophile when you have someone marrying a child that's not even 18? So, I mean, they can't even get their definitions straight. It's insane. And, you know, historically, if we go back, because, you know, I've been working on the family tree and stuff, but regardless, you know, historically, in England and other nations, it was fine to marry a young girl, I mean, 10 or 12 years old. And, you know, we've all heard the saying from these, what do I want to call them, from these conservative folks, that some of the ones that are a little bit crude, they'll say, well, you know, if they bleed, they're old enough to breed.
Our moral leaders.
Yeah, and it's like, seriously, I don't want to live back in the 1300s. You know, this is the 21st century here, and could y'all just keep your weird nonsense to yourself? Because, but I think the big thing is, Rick, we, the normal people, we are tired. I mean, the past 7 years, since 2015, it's been one outrage after the other, and I think we're just at the breaking point where we're all going, you know what, I'm just tired right now.
Yeah. No, we're tired, but I hope at some point we take that tired and anger and we go to the ballot polls and we throw these bums out.
Well, that's what we're going to have to do, and I think what usually happens is you know, I think the old saying, once you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, then everyone just kind of goes, okay, I've had enough. And I think that's what's going to happen. But you have a good evening.
Thank you, Alice. I appreciate it. I hope it doesn't. Look, I hope conservatives, and the reason I bring this up, I hope there are Republicans out there who look at their party and go, yeah, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. This is too, I'm tired of holding my nose. Too far, too fast, too much. Because look, and this is one of those religious zealotry things. Look, I don't have a problem with good, decent, honest religious people. It's these people who go just a bit way too far. You think about, you know, I was just talking about David Koresh earlier with a friend. I'm going, you know, it was really, all of that stuff was about, you know, worship me, be wonder I'm the savior, and give me your children to have sex with. This is the weirdness of this whole cult kind of mentality. It always does. It always comes back to this. And it's not surprising to me one bit that this is part of the conservative agenda, that this is part of the move towards, you know, silencing women, making them desperate and dependent, and silencing workers and silencing a workers' movement. The reason the labor movement has to be destroyed by conservatives is because that's how you fight for democracy. You fight for democracy in the workplace, and when you have it in the workplace, you demand it in society. And that, my friends, that's why they get to destroy it. It is that simple. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you're just joining us, make sure you grab the podcast. It is available wherever you get your podcast, from iTunes to iHeart, Podbean to Stitcher, everywhere in between, wherever you get yours. Also right there at thericksmithshow.com. Make sure you follow us on social media, Twitter @RickSmithShow, Facebook, YouTube, all of the sites. I'll take a quick break, right back after this. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1882. That was the day trade union leader and suffragist Rose Schneiderman was born. She arrived from Poland and settled in New York City with her family as a child. Her father died soon after, and Rose entered the workforce at the age of 13. She sewed caps and organized with the United Cloth and Cap Makers. Rose became a chief organizer with the New York Women's Trade Union League and played a prominent role in the 1909 uprising of the 20,000. While touring Ohio to rally support for women's suffrage in 1912, Schneiderman said, "What the women who labor wants is the right to live, not simply exist. The right to life as the rich woman has the right to life, and the sun and music and art. You have nothing that the humblest worker has not a right to have also. The worker must have bread, but she must have roses too." She grew frustrated with the privileged middle-class women of the New York Women's Trade Union League and began organizing with the ILGWU. But she soon quit, aggravated by the leadership's indifference towards organizing women workers. Schneiderman devoted her energies to women's suffrage. She would soon return to the Women's Trade Union League. By 1926, she served as its national president and became close friends with Eleanor Roosevelt. President Franklin Roosevelt appointed her to the National Advisory Board, where she wrote NRA codes for industries with women workers. Labor historian Annalise Orleck noted, Schneiderman attacked sexual segregation in the workplace, tried to unionize women, called for state regulations of working conditions. She argued for comparable worth laws, government-funded childcare, and maternity insurance. Those ideas and dreams are the legacy of Rose Schneiderman. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Barry Goldwater, considered a right-wing fringe candidate in 1964, won the Republican presidential nomination by declaring that, quote, extremism in defense of liberty is no vice. But the GOP is now way beyond the fringe, declaring that nuttiness in the defense of extremism is no vice. Consider Jenny Thomas. Her recent far-out political effort to overthrow the people's 2020 presidential vote shows that her husband Clarence Thomas, the dogmatic Supreme Court reactionary, is not the nuttiest member of the Thomas household. He's the best known of the duo, but wife Jenny has quietly been moving into the top circle of unhinged political conspiracy activists. Biden's defeat of Trump in 2020 set off this supremely connected partisan like an explosion in a fireworks factory. She spewed out a weeks-long barrage of text messages to Trump's chief of staff demanding that Republicans use the court to stop Congress from certifying Biden's victory. Jenny instructed the White House to, quote, release the Kraken. Huh? Kraken, the name of a mythological sea monster, was used by manic right-wingers as code for a package of kooky lawsuits they hoped judges would use to put Trump back in power. Jenny Thomas was not merely someone babbling free speech opinions, but she was a powerful political plotter actively strategizing to have unelected judges usurp the people's democratic authority. This was too crazy, even for the right-wing Republicans now running the high court, except for one. Guess who? Yes, despite his obvious conflict of interest, Clarence used his position to try to advance election cases in which his spouse had a personal stake. This is Jim Hightower saying, yet he wasn't punished for violating the ethics code because the U.S. Supreme Court has no ethics code.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So what's weird is, and this is where I think Democrats have fallen down on the job. I think they should have been doing much more on getting information out of this committee on January 6th. But the latest Quinnipiac poll finds that America is divided on whether Trump committed a crime. 46% of Americans think Trump did. 48% think he didn't. And I got to tell you, I think there's got to be more of this hearings, more of the evidence being presented, because I got to tell you, what I'm looking at, I don't know how you can come to any other conclusion that he pointed the crowd in that direction. He riled them up, and 457 minutes without a phone call being logged. Come on. That seems like a little bit of intent to me. But anyway, here to share some thoughts on the investigation and, or lack of what it apparently looks to me of what's going on. I've asked our good friend Jeff Hauser to come talk with us. Jeff is the executive director of the Revolving Door Project. They're at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. The revolvingdoorproject.org is their website. Jeff, thanks for taking time for us.
Always love to be on your show.
So I'm looking at this, this latest poll, and like a lot of this stuff, all of it's subject to change. If some new information comes out, clearly that could change. But I got to tell you, I think Democrats have done not such a great job on this. I think they should have been much more out front. There should be much more in the media, much more in the news, and much more aggressive with this. Or that's just my view.
Yeah, I think that most people want to be able to interpret the world consistent with their partisan and tribal affiliations. And the natural state for a Republican or Republican-leaning independent is to assume that while Trump may occasionally go a little bit too far, that he is not a criminal, or at least not a criminal of any laws that really matter. And so the natural response to January 6th over time is going to diminish unless the truth of it is thrown into people's heads in a way that they just cannot get away from it. And that doesn't mean just good reports being issued, good speeches being given. It requires provocative tactics that can break through the noise, because we live in an era in which if you want to avoid evidence that your leader, Donald Trump, did something wrong, it's pretty easy to do so. The only way to cut through, and it's not going to be fail-safe for 100% of the population, but the only way to get skepticism of Trump beyond 48% and more like to 60 or 70% is going to be very dramatic escalations of oversight by Congress and eventually prosecutions as seem warranted by the Department of Justice.
Now, I saw a report the other day that they're looking to hire, I guess, another 130 plus attorneys, which I said over a year ago, why aren't we having a mass hiring of people to work these cases through, to start these perp walks happening, to start these convictions happening, to get these people either pleading guilty or get these trials going, so that at least the appearance that they did something wrong and they're being punished, because as these are being slow walked, look at the message is, well, nothing's happening, must not have been that big of a deal. There's no real sense of urgency. I've heard all those things over the last year. And look, who can argue with that? I mean, there doesn't seem to be any real sense of urgency.
Yeah, I think that one of the ways that people who are not in the weeds in politics follow politics is they take cues from certain actions and from certain inactions. If Donald Trump had tried to commit a coup, you would think that the Democratic president and the Democratic Congress would be up in arms about it. And frankly, they're not. They decided very clearly that if you ask people in polls what was more important, COVID or the coup, or the economy or the coup in January or February of 2021, I'm sure people said COVID or the economy. And they're not wrong to say it. It's just a framing of the question in a way that makes no sense, because obviously our government ought to be capable of addressing a pandemic and addressing the economy while at the same time holding lawbreakers accountable. They should be able to do more than one thing at one time. But Democrats like to believe in doing things one thing at a time. They don't, their famous phrase about Gerald Ford from Lyndon Johnson was that he couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. Well, unfortunately, that's really the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party says, okay, our priority at the moment is reconciliation. So we're not going to pass a Biden budget. We'll stick with the Trump budget because this is our big legislative goal of the moment. And then when you ask them, what are they going to do on executive action? Are they going to go after student loans? Are they going to start going after corporate crooks who mistreat their workers or pollute the environment? They're like, no, we don't want to get in the way of our legislative agenda. We want to do that right now. And the reality is you need to be able to do everything. Running the government is hard, but it's important. We have different parts of the government for a reason. And that includes the ability to hold powerful people to account when they break the law, which, again, it seems very obvious based off public information that Trump and his team broke the law knowingly.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the judge who came out and said, look, quite frankly, it looks like he did. And there has to be some accountability. Because, look, if there's not accountability at the top, what does that message send for the rest of us? And if you can't hold them accountable, you know, for something that we all watched with our own two eyes, and then the outrage merchants have told us, no, that wasn't it at all. No, it wasn't that big of a deal. Now it's been spun. It was just like any other day. It was a peaceful day. They walked between the ropes. They were just tourists. Yeah, tourists who defecated on the floor. Tourists who urinated on people's desks, smashed windows, killed police officers. Any other day, Jeff.
Yeah, that's not a place where I'd like to visit if that's the normal tourist behavior. We all know what happened, what Trump was trying to do. And honestly, we kind of know why he was so desperate to hang on to power, which is that he assumed that the next president would allow prosecutors to go after him if he for other laws that he had broken. And ironically, there is no evidence that prosecutors are going after him for the crimes that Trump was worried about being exposed before January 6th, or the crimes of January 6th. And I understand that Merrick Garland has defenders who think that there's some brilliant tortoise versus hare strategy here, where slowly and steadily Merrick Garland is building up overwhelming force. But Robert Mueller played that playbook. He gave an obstruction of justice case over to Merrick Garland that was ready to go. It was punctilious. It had all the I's dotted and all the T's crossed. And I am pretty confident that a grand jury of Trump's peers in Washington, D.C. would have made quick work of the report that was left by Bob Mueller. So I am, somewhat disconsolate at the lack of spine from the Department of Justice.
Yeah, I have hope. I'm still hopeful. But I'm not holding my breath. And I said from the beginning, we're probably not going to hold Trump accountable. There will be some underlings, and that will happen. But it's not clearly going to be Trump. Even though today the House did vote to hold Peter Navarro and Dan Scavino in contempt, but they've got the kind of resources, especially Navarro, to fight this off for years. Not like you or I, who they'd walk us out in handcuffs. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Jeff Hauser. Jeff is the executive director of the Revolving Door Project. RevolvingDoorProject.org is their website. You can check out the incredible work that they do. I want to shift gears here for a second, because I was taking a look at your recent newsletter, and you point out that the Biden transition hasn't been allowed to complete. I think you said 117 positions still don't have nominees, and another 161 positions are either empty or have been filled by acting in some acting capacity. This isn't great, especially because, as you point out, we're heading towards the midterms when you usually have this churn, and you're going to have a number of people being turned over. I think you point out the fact that there's a rumor going around that Biden's chief of staff, Ron Klain, may be departing as well. This was, I think, all part of the fact that there really wasn't a transition. This was part of that, and also part of Mitch McConnell's plan to hold up a lot of nominees, and also there's a lot of chaos going on. Or am I being too generous in my defense?
I think one of Mitch McConnell's nicknames is the Turtle, and this is a guy who is willing to take criticism and play out a strategy that is unsubtle, but requires patience and is effective. He's not a brilliant tactician. He doesn't come up with 4-degree chess. He's not a House of Cards character. He is somebody who is just willing to use his advantages mercilessly. And one advantage in the U.S. Senate is that it's easy to slow things down. And what that means, you're seeing it right now at the Ketanji Brown Jackson nomination. You're seeing it with other very well-qualified people being nominated, a woman by the name of Julia Gordon, who is a great advocate for housing and for tenants' rights, who's up to run the FHA, the Federal Housing Agency, where they can't, well-qualified Democrats get split votes in committee. And they then require 3 additional votes after a committee vote to get confirmed. And each vote in the Senate takes time. And the Senate doesn't stay in session 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And honestly, it really shouldn't, because there is actually some role for senators to go back to their states and, hear from their constituents in person and the like. So time is precious, and Republicans are making it very difficult for Biden to get his entire team through by maximizing the amount of time for even uncontroversial nominees. And the result is that Biden is trying to be very careful on who he picks to make sure that to try to minimize how much the Republicans employ these delay tactics. But even when he is careful, the delay tactics are being deployed. And so Biden's not made nominations for everything, and many Biden nominations are held up. And so the executive branch is not run fully by Biden's top team, where the people who run it have acting titles. And not always, but often people with acting titles are a little bit more like substitute teachers than you'd like to see. And it's hard to take an agency over and fix the wreck that the Biden team inherited from Donald Trump if you have a substitute teacher in charge. It's just difficult.
Yeah.
And this problem is only going to get worse if Democrats don't hold the Senate.
Yeah, and I look at the NLRB as someone who I love this Jennifer Abruzzo. I love the fact that she's got a vision of where she wants to take that the NLRB and really make it what it was supposed to be and what it was. And the fact that we're talking about the Joy Silk doctrine that hasn't been discussed in decades. In fact, most of my labor scholars had even completely forgotten of and didn't even remember that it was even on the table. Could be a complete game changer. She's someone who's saying this is something we should be moving forward on.
Yeah, there are definitely bright spots in the Biden administration. Anti-monopoly is one area, and the other big one is some very strong labor-related nominations. And the general counsel position at the National Labor Relations Board is a very powerful, very important position. And yeah, Abruzzo has gone in with a clear commitment to fulfilling what the National Labor Relations Act passed under FDR in 1935 was designed to do, which is to promote the right of workers to collectively bargain. And she is unwilling to just acquiesce to the trend in American law, which has been increasingly anti-worker, honestly, for more than 70 years. She is not taking, well, that's just not how it's done, for an answer. And she should be a role model. She is systematically going after the ways in which employers have made the National Labor Relations Act ineffectual. She is trying to give workers a chance to organize themselves if that's their desire. And if we look at what's going on in Amazon warehouses and Starbucks shops and all sorts of workplaces across the country, we know that American workers are, for the most part, want unions. And at 6% unionization rate in the private sector, they're not getting them. And a lot of that is because the National Labor Relations Act, which was passed under the leadership of Senator Robert Wagner from New York, very strong pro-labor senator, it was designed to promote unionization. So that act, which remains the law of the land, has been undermined increasingly for decades. And it's great to see a Biden appointee taking aim and fighting back.
And it's working. I mean, to be honest, it's working. In fact, the fiscal year 2021, the first half of the year of 2021, union representation petitions were up over 57%. That hasn't happened, well, that kind of jump ever in my lifetime, which says that the message is being sent that this is the most pro-union president ever, and that you've got you've got an NLRB that's going to give workers a fair shake. This is a good sign, I think, and hopefully the workers are waking up to that reality, and we don't end up losing it, because this is one of the things the Supreme Court is hell bent on destroying. Allowing organizations and institutions like the NLRB to do what their mission actually is, because this is what the NLRB's mission is. As you pointed out, it is the goal of the National Labor Relations Act to encourage workers to join and form unions. That is the law of the land. Although Republicans want to go, no, because of Taft-Hartley, we gutted all that. Employers now have rights to harass and intimidate and have captive audience meetings and all of that stuff. But still, the law of the land is for the right of workers to join and form unions and to collectively bargain, and the government to promote that.
Yeah, and I mean, Taft-Hartley was followed by Harry Truman's historic come from behind victory in 1948, where he ran as an unabashed friend of labor. And that was how he came from behind. The newspaper said Dewey defeats Truman, but the reality was Truman defeated Dewey. And a lot of it was due to Truman's embrace of the labor movement after Taft-Hartley. And even Taft-Hartley was not actually, it was terrible, but it was not quite as awful as as the business interests were hoping for, because they were not able to dislodge the National Labor Relations Act because so much of it was so popular, which is why the next Republican president, Dwight Eisenhower, took a very different approach to the labor movement than Taft would have had Taft been the Republican president in 1953. America did not stand for that, and that's why these changes have never been taken on frontally. The way the labor movement was attacked, Taft-Hartley was important. The Landrum Bill in 1959. There have been other acts, but they were all more around the edges.
Yep.
The core attacks over time have been through Republican and business interest mastery of the executive branch and of the courts. And those are two things that progressives need to pay more and more attention to. So on the executive branch, it's appointing people like Abruzzo to be the National Labor Relations Board General Counsel. And on the courts, it's important to note, so if a case gets appealed, there's a decision by the board of the National Labor Relations Board, a pro-worker decision. It will get appealed to a circuit court. So it skips the district court. It'll go to a circuit court. There are 11 circuit courts that are numbered, plus the DC circuit. So there are 12 geographic circuit courts. Most cases will not go beyond that to the Supreme Court. And so that's why it's so important that we get strong nominees to the circuits. There has been some slow improvement in the circuit courts under Biden. Unfortunately, there have been more vacancies in already blue states and already strong for Democrats circuit courts. But slowly but surely, we are making the circuit courts less imbalanced. And yes, I definitely fear that the Roberts Court will overturn some cases eventually, but a lot can happen. And it's really important that we have figures like Abruzzo trying to do the best they can in the short run and not saying, well, in a few years, there's a chance this is going to get overturned. So why do anything?
Yeah.
No, if you're in government, you should do the best that you can every day. And if you make life a little bit better for working people, that's a huge win. And you should be satisfied with that. And you should be motivated by that. You shouldn't have to say, well, I'm positive this is going to stand for 100 years.
I'm right there with you. Jeff, I appreciate the time. As always, great stuff, my friend. Keep up the great work there at the Revolving Door Project. As always, good stuff, man.
Take care.
Our good friend, Jeff Hauser, Executive Director of the Revolving Door Project. Make sure you check out the work that they do, revolvingdoorproject.org. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day that the United States declared war on Germany and entered World War I. The war had been raging since 1914, but the U.S. did not enter the conflict until 1917. Dubbed the War to End All Wars, the conflict transformed the work experience for many women. As men went off to fight, industries looked to women to fill the labor shortage. By the end of the war, 3 million new women workers had taken jobs in war industries and at work sites like food production facilities and textile mills. A year after the U.S. entered into the war, the Seattle Union Record described the impact on women workers, writing, there has been a sudden influx of women into such unusual occupations as bank clerks, ticket sellers, elevator operator, chauffeur, streetcar conductor, railroad track walker, section hand, locomotive wiper and oiler, locomotive dispatcher, block operator, drawbridge attendant, and employment in machine shops, steel mills, powder and ammunition factories, airplane works, boot blackening, and farming. The Department of Labor established the Women in Industry Service to address the needs of this growing women's workforce. After the war, the initiative was renamed in 1920 to the Women's Bureau. Its charge was to, quote, formulate standards and policies which shall promote the welfare of wage-earning women, improve their working conditions, increase their efficiency, and advance their opportunities for profitable employment. Yet after the war, many women were not able to keep their new jobs. Men returning from the battlefront expected women to return home and open up jobs for male workers.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Let's go to the phone lines. Got Kathy on line one. Kathy, how are you doing today?
Oh, great. How are you doing?
I am fantastic. Thanks for your call. What's on your mind?
Okay. The lady that I talked to said that you'd already talked about Mark Meadows getting busted or getting caught registering a trailer as his main address in South Carolina.
Yeah, I think it was in North Carolina actually, but evidently his wife came up with an idea. Let's get a trailer park home there, and he actually never visited it, from what the allegation is.
I know.
Which, hey, look, there are tons of these allegations. Where I'm at in Pennsylvania, Rick Santorum had a house he never went to.
Yeah.
These people think they're above this.
I know. Well, Pennsylvania has gotten called the dead mother state.
There's some truth in that.
I know. But they had that one lady that the parole officer told her she could vote when she had a felony arrest, and she did it, and they gave her 5 years in prison for it.
Yeah, what I find interesting is the people who are screaming that there's all this voter fraud tend to be the ones who are committing
the ones
it.
doing it.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
I know. I don't know. I hope they just dry their butts.
Yes. I like the way you think, Kathy. Anything else on your mind?
Thank you.
Good stuff. I appreciate it. No, I mean, Meadows, the State Bureau of Investigation there in North Carolina, they've opened up a probe, and they're looking into it because the allegation is he never showed up. I guess you have to at least spend one night there. And how hard is it? I mean, it's not like that's an onerous bar. You could just spend one night. Just go, get your sleeping bag, whatever you got to do, lay on the floor, one night. And, here's the weird thing. Do you think he's going to go to jail? Probably not. And that's the thing that really infuriates me. The woman, as Kathy pointed out, who's parole officer, yeah, you're okay, go vote. She gets 5 years. She actually thought she had the right to vote. The idiot here in Pennsylvania who, said, they're going to steal my vote, and I'm going to vote for my wife, or I'm going to vote for, for my so-and-so who died. They're going to get hammered. But someone like Meadows, this is what's infuriating to people. The elites continue to get away with stuff. And the other part of it is this idea that, and I've heard this from my friends, who truly they've internalized. Joe Biden was in his basement, rewiring all of the computers that just stole the election for him. But all the Republicans who won in 2020, somehow Joe Biden's so smart that he was able to redo all the computers so that just he won. Yet he's not very bright. Just quite comical. Which then justifies all of this kind of thievery and all of this kind of insanity. We're in really screwed up times, folks. Screwed up. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're just joining us, make sure you grab the podcast. Never miss a second. We're in really tough moments. Also love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If I didn't already say that, I do love answering emails, especially crazy ones. You go to the front of the line. Quick break, right back after this.
We are on a fast track to climate disaster.
UN report warns stopping climate change is possible. We have all the tools we need, but time is running out. Plus, U.S. West careens between intense fires and floods, and it's going to get worse.
Oh, if someone had only warned us. All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Today, is the government fixing the price on insulin? What's next? Gas?
Yes, please, fix the price on gas, Congressman Kathy McMorris Rogers of Washington. Yes, this is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I know whenever I see the headline, New Report from UN Says, the rest of that headline is not going to be good.
Yeah, generally it is not. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on Monday published its latest global assessment of climate science, the third installment of this round. This report on mitigation warns that stopping climate change is still doable, but the window of action to avoid irreversible damage is rapidly closing, and there is little margin for error. But the IPCC reports that the good news is we can do it quickly and relatively cheaply. The most important takeaway is that we have the solutions, but the only thing preventing us from taking advantage of those solutions is the political will, and that is being stopped by powerful fossil fuel interests.
Yes, it is, and it's being stopped by the politicians who are paid by those powerful fossil fuel interests.
The science, not surprisingly, is not great. The report warns countries are far too slow in cutting emissions. The world is now on track to blow past Paris Climate Agreement targets by 2030, and without action could hit a catastrophic 3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels or more.
Well, why worry?
Well, scientists say going beyond the agreed limit of warming no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius means that the dangers of global warming, like worsening extreme weather disasters and ecosystem collapse, could become irreversible and trigger cascading impacts. Humans have already heated the planet by 1.1 degrees Celsius, and in a statement, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres slammed rich countries for failing to act, saying this report
is a litany of broken climate promises. It is a file of shame, cataloguing the empty pledges that put us firmly on track towards an unlivable world. We are on a fast track to climate disaster. Major cities underwater, unprecedented heat waves, terrifying storms, widespread water shortages, the extinction of 1 million species of plants and animals. And this is not fiction or exaggeration. It is what science tells us will result from our current energy policies.
Fakest accent I've ever heard.
Now, this IPCC report focuses on mitigation. It finds the world has made progress thanks to the plunging costs of renewable energy, which is now cheaper than fossil fuels, and with an all-hands-on-deck approach and immediate drastic deployment of tools and technologies we already have, there is still time, barely, to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. The report is a blueprint for mitigation, what nations need to do. The IPCC lays out literally hundreds of specific strategies that fall under 6 main pathways to curb emissions. Ramp up renewable energy and ditch fossil fuels, make buildings more efficient, transition quickly to electric vehicles, design and upgrade cities to be clean and green using simple urban planning measures and building practices to give people more transportation choices, invest in a just transition for developing countries, adopt regenerative farming practices to store carbon, and protect and restore nature to expand nature's ability to draw down carbon from the air.
In other words, there's plenty of ways to do this. All we are lacking is the will to do this.
Exactly. The IPCC report finds that all of these strategies are not only achievable, but also relatively cheap, since action is far, far cheaper than catastrophe. We have all the tools we need, except the political will.
Well, the difference is, it may be cheaper to take action now, but that means the fossil fuel companies don't make money now. It'll be more expensive later, and that will be paid by the taxpayers.
Exactly. Finally, an example of how costly global global warming already is, the deepening mega drought across the western U.S. is affecting crops in California. Water managers announced that despite recent storms, the snowpack in the Sierra Nevada mountains that supplies the state's farms has abruptly melted to the lowest levels in 70 years. A different study warns the U.S. West will be more frequently hit by the 1-2 punch of massive wildfires followed by torrential downpours, causing floods and landslides. Burning fossil fuels is making the destructive cycle of more intense fire and rain more frequent and more costly, and it's going to get worse.
Why worry? It's only going to be 93 degrees in Southern California this week, in April. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, I've talked about religion, one of those things that you really like talking about in mixed company. Because sadly, it's gone so far off the beaten path. The right has tried to take the ground of we're the party of Christianity, we're the party of religion, the party of piety. And yet, the party of family values, we hear it all the time. And yet, some of the crazy stuff that they're doing. I mean, look at this stuff in Tennessee, doing away with the marriage age. And we know where this craziness leads. You look at some of the stuff that we see every day from their policies. And again, I grew up in the Catholic Church when we were talking about peace and social justice. How do we make people's lives better? How do we help? Not tear apart. How do we use religion to lift people up, not tear people down? And I'm hoping at some point we find a way back to that. Instead of having it be something that tears us and rips at us and is divisive with Christian warriors, where we have people who are willing to reach out their hand and help, not smack down. And here to share some thoughts on how maybe we can do some of that and how maybe we can use religion to bring us together and faith to help heal and move a country forward. I've asked Maggie Siddiqui to come talk with us. Maggie is the Senior Director of Religion and Faith at the Center for American Progress. They got a new piece out looking at 22 faith leaders that are worth watching here in 2022. Maggie, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, I look at this, and as I said, I grew up in a Catholic church back in the 70s is when I was going to Catholic school, and it really was. It was about, the Sermon on the Mount, feeding the hungry, taking care of the poor, healing the sick. It was about that stuff. And it was about, policies that would do that. Yet we're in a moment now where the people who tell me about their religiosity, people who wear their religion on their sleeve, are the ones who are cutting food programs, the people who don't want us to have health care, who are the people who are destroying that safety net that would help people. And I'm struggling with it, man. I'm struggling with how you can say that you're of some person that believes in God while doing these horrible things.
Well, Rick, you are absolutely not alone in that. And polling tells us that about 3/4 of all Americans identify as people of faith. What most people don't realize is those numbers are roughly equal among folks who identify as Democrats and those who identify as Republicans. The differences that you will find are that those on the left end of the spectrum tend to represent all of America's religious diversity and racial diversity, whereas on the right, folks tend to be more white and more Christian. And so when we are thinking about religion and public policy, oftentimes we're thinking only about the voices of those conservative white Christians that have very specific kinds of views on public policy that really don't, I think, tend to align with those core messages that you were just saying of helping the poor, of ensuring justice and equality in the world. And the reality is that a sizable number of people of faith are advocating for progressive issues across the country, which is why we were so excited to put out, this is actually an annual list of faith leaders to watch. Our 2022 list, I think, is really exciting just to see the incredible work that is happening. Some of it by national faith leaders who are putting out scholarship or advocating on Capitol Hill, some of it with grassroots organizers that are doing so from a place of faith, congregational leaders. They're all advocating for progressive change in their communities and across the country. It's just not the dominant narrative that we hear, which is why we think it's so important to talk about that work and uplift that.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I've never been one to proselytize. I've never been one to get out there and say, follow me because I believe faith is something that's personal. I think it's something that should be kept between you and your maker and whatever you believe. It's always been one of those things that I believe that you don't go shove it down someone else's throat. And yet we're in this moment where you see these, I watch these televangelists who are, wealthy beyond imagination. And I'm thinking of one down in Texas where on April Fool's Day was just brilliant. There was the guy, he owns that church down in Texas that wouldn't let anyone in when the flood was going on, where they had a meme of him. He goes, I sold all my worldly possessions to feed the poor on April Fool's Day, because that really is a joke, because he wouldn't even open the door when the poor needed him the most. To me, that idea of religion and faith is about helping and doing, not because you're going to get attention, not because you're going to get accolades, not because someone notices, but because it's right, because nobody's going to notice, and you're just doing the right thing.
Right. And I think what's sad is that so many people see what's playing out on the religious right, and they say, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to do that. And so people who might be that really powerful counterweight to the kind of problematic actions of the religious right often don't speak up. I'm talking about kind of your average person of faith who says, that doesn't sit right with me. That doesn't feel like the religion I know. They don't want to replicate what's happening on, on the other side of things in this display of faith to kind of, grow one's community or score political points. And I think that's wonderful. But at the same time, if we're not talking about faith and we're not talking about what that drives us to do in this deeply personal way, the way that you are so beautifully articulating it, Rick, then what we're doing is we're ceding all of the airspace, to those folks that are doing it only in problematic ways. So do we have to fight this fight then? I mean, because I've never wanted to go, no, I'm more religious than you, and this isn't a fight that I think we need. I don't, help me with this then, because this isn't a fight I want to have. I believe faith is something that is personal, should remain personal. It isn't a battleground for hooray, look at me. It should be making us better people. But I see the policy. I see the policies. I see the C Street people who have done horrible, horrible things in our government and used religion to justify it. I see the people out there pimping the prosperity gospel who are saying, hey, you can be rich, just give me all your money, which is insane. But I see this stuff and I'm going, at some level, maybe you're right. Maybe we do have to be more, I don't know, evangelical in a sense, only have it in a, I don't know. What do we do, I guess? I think there are a couple different things that it's really important we do. So one is, I think, for folks in the public square, and I'm really thinking about policymakers here in particular, I think sometimes, where they arrive to, from their, or how they arrive to their policy positions, rather, is from a place of deep-seated faith in many cases. It may not be, but if it is, I think there's a way to authentically represent that when they speak about why they care about, feeding those who are hungry, why they care about access to safe water, all of clean water, all of those things, from a place of faith that's very authentic. I think if it ceases to be authentic, it's we don't want it out there, right? So that's one. I think people need to speak about their personal faith values. But the other thing is, as we're doing that, and as we're speaking about what our values look like, whether they're faith-based or not, we really need to be more proactive about embracing religious pluralism. Because what's happening oftentimes when you're seeing these showy displays of religion on the right is that they are of a very particular religious brand, and they're doing so in a way that's infringing on the separation of church and state, and saying there is a particular brand of conservative Christianity that should be sort of the American way. It's an impulse that's called Christian nationalism, the notion that America is and should always be a Christian country, not Christian majority, Christian country. And it's very intertwined with sort of similar white nationalist ideologies, and the sort of notion that America should be for a group of people that look and believe a specific way. So when we speak about religion and public policy, the vast majority of us should talk about what do we really want for our country that embraces our religious diversity, our racial diversity. How do we talk about religion and public policy in a way that is much more inclusive? And so when we do bring our personal faith values into the space, it's not saying this is my faith and I believe this and therefore our policies should look like this. No, it's saying this is my faith, this is what I believe. It leads me to these values of compassion, values of justice, right? Values that we all share. And now that we've sort of discussed the shared values that we have as a religiously diverse country, how do we take action from a place of those shared values?
Yeah, see, I wish I believed we all shared those values. No, I'm not making a joke. I mean, I look at some on the religious right, the people who tell me that they're Christian warriors, the people who are on some of these radical extremists who tell me about how horrible Sharia law is, and then set out to make a Christian version of it, and have the same evil kind of mentality aims that want to do the same thing to women here. I fear them, as much, if not more, because they're well armed and well organized, and well have rights here that we all have. I'm concerned because they've been normalized, and that's a strange place that we're in. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're here with Maggie Siddiqui. She's a senior director of religion and faith at the Center for American Progress. AmericanProgress.org is the website that you can check out. They've got a piece out on 22 faith leaders to watch in 2022, as Maggie pointed out earlier. They do this every year. They pick out some faith leaders to pay attention to, and I highly suggest taking a look at it. A wide, diverse group of folks there. I was looking at them. My question: how many multimillionaires you got on the list? I was looking at some of the right wing folk. Are there any Lear jets among them? Are they shaking down their parishioners because they need to get somewhere quicker, like Creflo Dollar a couple of years ago? Any of those folks on your list?
I would be very surprised if we did.
No, because I mean, my problem with a lot of showy kind of religious folks is, and this I guess is just me being jaded a little bit. And maybe you can help me, because I think a lot of people in this moment are getting a little jaded on religion, as it's become religion incorporated. It's no longer about the values that we've been talking about. It's no longer about trying to make people's lives better. It's about, frankly, it's about the money. I mean, a lot of people, it seems to be, when you look at these televangelists, it's, hey, Jesus loves you, give me money. Hey, you're wonderful, give me money. So for me, there seems to be some of that in there. So how much of this is there?
So I think there is a big difference between who's taking up all the airspace and what is the sort of majority of authentic faith leadership actually look like. Unfortunately, we hear a lot more from the seedier folks than we do, I think, from the people who really are just trying to serve their communities and cultivate a better kind of vision for America moving forward. The folks on this list are wonderful people who absolutely have a vision that I think the vast majority of us share here.
You answered that beautifully, because that was the right answer. I threw a really bad question at you. It was a great answer, because look, I mean, I look at some of the people on the far right, the money grubbers, the money changers, if you will, and you handled that beautifully. So in moving forward, and this is the last line of questioning I've got for you, in looking at some of these folks, because it does come back to policy. And I do want leaders that we can follow. I want people who are going to stand up. I look at Reverend Barber as somebody who has a moral authority when you're talking about his Poor People's Campaign that I just absolutely love. And I hope people are following, because I think he's fighting the righteous fight. I think he's fighting the good fight. When I was a kid, the priests, they were out on picket lines, standing at workers, fighting for better wages, hours, conditions. Those are the kind of faith leaders that I want to get behind. And I think in this moment, I hope we're finding more of them.
I hope so too. I'll also put in a plug that Reverend William Barber was actually on our list several years ago as a faith leader to watch. So I'm hoping that we're foretelling some of the good work that's going to come from these folks down the line as well.
Great stuff, Maggie. I appreciate your time. Great talking with you. Keep up the amazing work that you guys are doing.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Outstanding stuff, Maggie Siddiqui. Make sure you check out their stuff, AmericanProgress.org, the website. We'll get links out on social media. I can check out her piece on 22 faith leaders to watch in 2022. Well worth it. I highly suggest it. Very, very interesting group. Right back with your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK. 1-866-416-7425. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. Generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. You got a thought, question, comment. And look, on the religion front, I thought Maggie did a great job, because that's a tough question. Aren't you got any millionaires on your list? Because sadly, I've gotten to the point where I'm kind of jaded on religious leaders. Because you see these charlatans, these people on TV, and it really is. It's all about lining their pockets. Creflo Dollar, I need a $60 million jet. Give me a freaking break. There are people who are hungry in your congregation. How about feeding them? There's a good start. How about we do that? You got people who need help, and yet the right using religion to deny people the help that they need. It's amazing to me. In fact, just the beginning of this year, I go back to the child tax credit. That child tax credit cut child poverty by 40%. And yet we couldn't get the good Christian folk. We couldn't get our religious superiors to support $250 a kid to make sure that there's food at the end of the month. I mean, look, I grew up in an environment where I know what that's like, to know that there's not going to be food at the end of the month in the community, not just in my household, but in the entire community. Where I grew up, our house was robbed like 20 times that I can remember. And it was always, we didn't have anything. They would steal food. They would steal, whatever little trinkets or whatever they could grab. Because we were all poor. I mean, how cruel was it? I've said this before. Had you given my mother back in the 70s an extra $20 to make it to the end of the month, to make sure that there was food at the end of the month. And this is why I'm such a big supporter of labor unions. Because I still remember the neighbor, a black family. He got a job at Ford. They had 5 kids, lived in a two-bedroom townhouse. It was a housing project. They were all rows. He got a job at Ford, and immediately their lives got better. They had food at the end of the month. That's the one thing I remember. And good food. And they shared. And they got bikes, and they got better clothes, and they got a secondhand car, and eventually they moved out of the neighborhood. Their lives got better immediately. Why? They had a little bit of extra income. They were making a better life because they were making better wages. It comes down to a better living. A little bit extra money makes life so much better. And what we're finding out is the studies are showing, guess what? A little bit of extra income makes life a little bit better. And this most recent study out done by the Social Policy Institute at Washington University, they've pointed out that once the child tax credit money dried up, employment opportunities for parents also began to dry up as employment declined for some parents. And fairly dramatically, as they pointed out, they said that employment of child tax credit recipients dropped from 72.4 to 68.3% after the final monthly payment in December of 2021. What they're saying is that it equates to approximately 1.4 million recipient households that may have left jobs because, well, they didn't have the money, couldn't afford it. And you go, well, how's that possible? Well, you got to make ends meet in one way or another. Does that mean you ended up back on the rolls of social programs, which would then take our religious right friends and go, see, those social programs, they're too generous. We got to make people more desperate. Remember, these are the people who tell us how religious and how pious they are. And this is the incredibly frustrating moment in which we're in. Because I still remember the priests who talked about helping hands and being a positive force for change in your community and all of that, instead of using religion as something divisive. You see people walking around with Christian warrior shirts on, like Jesus would be taking up a gun and shooting people. It's crazy. Crazy the world we're in. As I said yesterday, the president has extended the moratorium on the student loan payments. So folks will have a little bit more of a cushion to the end of August, I believe. And what we've also found on that front is some millennials who are so deep in debt that they have never had a savings account, over the pandemic have actually gotten a little bit of a savings account, and they've seen their credit ratings actually get a little bit better. Oh my goodness, shocker of shockers, that if you have some income that you don't have to waste on handing over to the student loan organizations, that you might actually have something of a little bit of a living. And the one article shared a couple of stories of this one couple. She was paying almost $800 a month in student loans. He was paying over $500 a month in student loans. You're looking at $1,300 for the couple in student loans. And you go, they've never had any savings. They've always been deep in credit card debt, always, in car payments. They're for the first time able to pay off their credit cards, for the first time getting out from under their car payments and having a little bit of savings. And guess what? Their credit scores went up pretty substantially. Now they're going to get hit with those payments again fairly soon, which means something has to be done. Now I've never said forgive them. I'm saying what they took out, make them pay. But this idea of gouging them with massive interest, at some point you've got to fix that. And I said before, buy them all up, pay them back at a 1% interest rate, 0%, 1% interest rate, and make sure that, you know what, we make sure that they pay it back and it's skin in the game, and then we fix it for the future, that we never do this to another generation. We never do this to another generation. because we really did. We really stuck it to this generation. Something awful. Sad stuff. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I do answer all emails personally, especially the crazy ones, which I do. I prefer those. I do like the ones that say how wonderful I am. Thank you for those. And I've gotten a number of them as we've added new stations. Our friends in Madison and Waukesha, welcome aboard. Also our friends in Minneapolis and Chicago and around the country. Appreciate the thoughts. Gonna take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day that the United States declared war on Germany and entered World War I. The war had been raging since 1914, but the U.S. did not enter the conflict until 1917. Dubbed the War to End All Wars, the conflict transformed the work experience for many women. As men went off to fight, industries looked to women to fill the labor shortage. By the end of the war, 3 million new women workers had taken jobs in war industries and at work sites like food production facilities and textile mills. A year after the U.S. entered into the war, the Seattle Union Record described the impact on women workers, writing, "There has been a sudden influx of women into such unusual occupations as bank clerks, ticket sellers, elevator operator, chauffeur, streetcar conductor, railroad track walker, section hand, locomotive wiper and oiler, locomotive dispatcher, block operator, drawbridge attendant, and employment in machine shops, steel mills, powder and ammunition factories, airplane works, boot blackening, and farming." The Department of Labor established the Women in Industry Service to address the needs of this growing women's workforce. After the war, the initiative was renamed in 1920 to the Women's Bureau. Its charge was to, quote, formulate standards and policies which shall promote the welfare of wage-earning women, improve their working conditions, increase their efficiency, and advance their opportunities for profitable employment. Yet after the war, many women were not able to keep their new jobs. Men returning from the battlefront expected women to return home and open up jobs for male workers.
Barry Goldwater, considered a right-wing fringe candidate in 1964, won the Republican presidential nomination by declaring that, quote, extremism in defense of liberty is no vice. But the GOP is now way beyond the fringe, declaring that nuttiness in the defense of extremism is no vice. Consider Jenny Thomas. Her recent far-out political effort to overthrow the people's 2020 presidential vote shows that her husband Clarence Thomas, the dogmatic Supreme Court reactionary, is not the nuttiest member of the Thomas household. He's the best known of the duo, but wife Jenny has quietly been moving into the top circle of unhinged political conspiracy activists. Biden's defeat of Trump in 2020 set off this supremely connected partisan like an explosion in a fireworks factory. She spewed out a weeks-long barrage of text messages to Trump's chief of staff demanding that Republicans use the court to stop Congress from certifying Biden's victory. Jenny instructed the White House to, quote, release the Kraken. Huh? Kraken, the name of a mythological sea monster, was used by manic right-wingers as code for a package of kooky lawsuits they hoped judges would use to put Trump back in power. Jenny Thomas was not merely someone babbling free speech opinions, but she was a powerful political plotter actively strategizing to have unelected judges usurp the people's democratic authority. This was too crazy, even for the right-wing Republicans now running the high court, except for one. Guess who? Yes, despite his obvious conflict of interest, Clarence used his position to try to advance election cases in which his spouse had a personal stake. This is Jim Hightower saying, yet he wasn't punished for violating the ethics code because the U.S. Supreme Court has no ethics code.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So you got to get a kick out of what's going on in Ohio. I mean, the Senate race is an absolute, let's just say it's a mess. FCC regulations do not allow me to say what I really believe of the giant show that's going on there. But Mike Gibbons, one of the candidates there in the Ohio Senate race on the Republican side, said that diversity, equity, and inclusion are not American principles. And I got to go, I there's that big green thing out in the Hudson River. Is the woman with the stick with the thing that's supposed to be, what they call her, Lady Liberty or something like that? Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Didn't we used to believe something along? Couldn't you make the argument that that was about diversity, equity, inclusion on a certain level? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe not in Mike Gibbons' world. Maybe not in the 1% world. And here to share some thoughts on the giant S show that is the Ohio Republican senatorial campaign. And look, the entire the entire election cycle that is going on in Ohio. I've asked David Pepper to come talk with us. David's the former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, yeah, I was thinking about that. And Gibbons is famously, I think, quite wealthy, so he also probably doesn't have a lot of quarters hanging around, which all say on them "e pluribus unum," which also seems to be an embracing of diversity and a broad group coming together as one. So yeah, it was a bizarre. But by the way, he may be the candidate. He is probably the guy who's got his own lane. He's really keeping separate. So he may end up being a no-name who ends up vaulting into the nomination. We'll see. But he's actually at this point one of the guys tied in the lead. Well,
because he doesn't seem, just from being a way outside observer, he doesn't seem like an absolute lunatic. I mean, he seems out there, but Josh Mandel, J.D. Vance. I mean, come on.
He's also self-funding, and he's running a lot of ads where he's talking to the camera, and he comes across as as you said, a conservative business guy who's on the far right. Let's be clear. But he's not he doesn't seem as off the wall as Mandel does right now. But by the way, he has said some really bad things. This will help Tim Ryan in the fall about how it's no big deal when we send Ohio jobs overseas at lower wages. So he's got a lot of juicy quotes from his business time before he ever wanted to be a politician that also could make him quite vulnerable if that ends up being what a lot of the campaign's about. But in the primary, he's actually coming on strong.
Yeah, now I look at this quote, this diversity, equity, and inclusion are not American principles. And I believe that this wasn't an oops, this wasn't an accident. I believe this wasn't even dog whistle for the base. This was red meat for the base. This is saying that they're trying to change our America. And this is that flag in the ground that he's staking, saying, no, we're going to go back to the way we used to believe things used to be. I believe this was chosen and this was on purpose.
Yeah, and other ads that are up right now from Mandel and Vance literally start off saying they think we're racist, but they literally are all grabbing it at the same dog whistles and blowing them as loudly as they can. So that was a milder form of what we're seeing on TV from J.D. Vance and Josh Mandel right now.
Crazy. Now, your state, the Senate race, obviously way off on the fringe, but your entire system seems just completely screwed up. I guess you're going to have two primaries now. If you have maps yet, do we have maps yet? Are there maps?
Let me just say, we are this close to basically no rule of law in Ohio. We have a Supreme Court of Ohio, bipartisan, a lifelong Republican Chief Justice and 3 Democratic endorsed justices who, by that one vote, are clinging to the rule of law in Ohio, because right now the State House and the governor and the Secretary of State have at this point been found to have violated the Constitution 4 times. And my guess is will have been found to violate a 5th time on a map they voted last week. They simply don't care about the Ohio Constitution that 70% of Ohioans voted for to end partisan gerrymandering if it costs them power. So it really is. This was originally about democracy, right? And gerrymandering, get a better democratic system. We're now talking about the basic rule of law because they're defining the Constitution. They are defying the clear orders of a bipartisan Supreme Court. And now they're so mad at the Republican Chief Justice, they're saying they're going to impeach her. So to answer your question, one, it's so lawless it should scare people. We're hanging on by a thread. And the congressional map, due to some timing issues and a technical issue, may end up not being ruled upon until at least the effective ruling is 24, which is a tragedy that they intentionally caused by what they were trying to do, run out the clock. The State House map, and I hope that's not the case, but it could very well be. The State House map is one that I think we still have a very good shot of having a fair map come out of the process. But this is a group of people who decided a year ago, we would rather break the law multiple times, risk the accountability for that, or hope there is no accountability, risk contempt of court. All of that we're willing to do if it means we get to keep power without any fair elections. And in some ways, it's working for them. Now, I hope it doesn't in the end, but so far, it's working in some ways for them.
Well, what is the accountability? I mean, Republicans control the state completely. I mean, even if the Supreme Court says you violated the law, what's the repercussion? I mean, if it's a Republican governor who's supposed to be the one who enforces the law, you've got a Republican Attorney General, Republican Secretary of State, you've got all the Republicans controlling all this. Who actually enforces this if the judge says you broke the law and something needs to be done?
You know, you hope that in the end, and I think the governor himself would hopefully take it seriously. Although, by the way, one other part of the lawlessness is that the governor's son is a justice and refuses to recuse himself in cases where his dad is the defendant. I mean, that's how lawless things are in the wide open. And that's why, you know, if in the end what they're doing succeeds in some way, even if not completely, it's a really scary moment. I mean, voters by more than 70% voted to end partisan gerrymandering. And this group of people in the State House simply cannot let go of it, even when the law tells them to. That's getting closer to Orban's Hungary than Ohio's, you know, in America's democracy. So I think in the end, the other thing that's up right now is there are motions filed and debates taking place at the court right now about whether or not these people should be found in contempt of court. But the question again is, okay, great. What sanction is there to them if they're found to be guilty of that? There's another form of law in Ohio called misconduct in office. And that's another thing that I think we should look at, because I was saying this earlier on a podcast. From Donald Trump on down, we have a massive problem in this country of lack of accountability for lawlessness in the political sphere. And what we are seeing play out around the country, including Ohio, is if there is no accountability and they see no accountability, they never stop breaking the law, breaking all norms. So all of us who care about democracy, rule of law, and I'm glad they're pushing forward on contempt of court with these two people in Congress today. I hope DOJ is doing that with Trump. No accountability in the end means they keep going and get more aggressive. They'll move until someone stops them. No, and that's a problem right now in Ohio.
And this is where, you know, I had reached out to a couple of friends in Ohio and say, what do you think of what's going on? Because you're going to have to go to the polls twice. It's going to cost your state millions and millions of dollars that you could use on anything else. Better schools, better roads, you know, healthcare for seniors, whatever. You can throw it in the lake it would still be better spent than this. Right. And they're like, well, you know, Joe Biden stole 2020. So the justification seems to be exactly what you're saying, that they're okay with this kind of lawlessness because they've been sold on this idea, well, so they did it before, so this is our turn. Do you find that to be something that's being used?
Yeah, I mean, I think that and it's a scary moment in our country, in a bellwether state like Ohio, which is right now a bellwether for many bad things. People are literally, and this is true of the Secretary of State of Ohio, by the way. This is true of these state house leaders. They are at the point where they don't fear breaking the law if it serves their quest for power. And by the way, one other thing that's striking about the debate in Ohio, neither the Democrats nor those suing over these maps, not one time have they ever put forward a map that would lead to a majority of Democrats in the State House or Congress. This is a fight over Republicans wanting a map where not one member of their caucus would face a competitive district. So it's not even about control. It's about total lack of accountability. They are willing to break the law 4 times in risk contempt of court. Again, not because they're worried they would lose power to the Democrats, but because they don't want one of their members to have an election where they're not guaranteed victory. I mean, that should scare us. But it also is a really good reminder that what gerrymandering is about is more than control. It's more than having a majority. It's about not wanting to be held accountable, which also allows you to be really, really extreme, really anti-worker, really anti sort of common good, but you get away with it because you're so far from a competitive district. That's what they're fighting so hard for. No. And that's what they've lived, and that's the world they've lived in for the last decade. That's why these states all across this country are getting away. You know, Ohio's not an extreme red state, but we're legislating that way because our districts allow for it. That's the system they're fighting so hard to continue.
No, you're right. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with David Pepper. David's a former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party, also the author of Laboratories of Autocracy, a wake-up call from behind the lines. We can get links out on social media. You can check out his book. Fabulous. I highly suggest it. Now, you brought up, Ohio is not a deep red state. In fact, it's a purple state, I believe. It's a very, most of my friends are Democrats, sometimes flip both sides of the ballot. But sadly, as you've said, they're legislating like a far-right state. And far-right states are bringing the Republican worldview to legislation in ways that are really, really ugly and dangerous. I look at, taking women's rights away. I look at the assaults on workers' rights, and voting rights are being just eviscerated. They're undoing the 20th century, and the 21st doesn't look a whole hell of a lot different than the 18th.
No, it's true. I mean, the reason I call the book Laboratories of Autocracy, it's not some catchy title. They're operating as laboratories. They're operating in conjunction. And so whenever one state does something that succeeds and survives court scrutiny, all the other states do it. If someone, one of the best examples of this, by the way, they also will learn from failure. So when John Kasich and the Republicans here attacked collective bargaining through Senate Bill 5, and included police and fire in that attack in those unions, it failed miserably. So all future attempts to attack collective bargaining in other states did not include police and fire. So it's not as if each state is operating on its own. The right wing has decided, understandably, that the best way to get their entire agenda done, be it economics, taxation, crazy right-wing social views, mostly, by the way, in the minority viewpoint, these views are, the best way to get them done is to ram them through state houses all at once in multiple state houses, as opposed to worrying about getting them done in Congress. That's why Mitch McConnell told Rick Scott to stop talking so loudly. They can get most of their agenda done in states where no one's watching, as opposed to putting it on, Front Street in the Senate.
Yeah. Now, you brought up Rick Scott. I mean, if you look at his plan, extremely crazy and off the fringe. And if most people knew what was actually in it, they'd be running from the Republican Party. Because look, he's calling for a sunset of every federal program in 5 years, which means Granny on Social Security kicked to the curb. Granny, no longer you're going to get Medicare, no Medicaid, no food stamps, no farm bill, none of this stuff, no highway bill for states, no. And the hope that he and others are going to reauthorize this stuff. Are you kidding me? But this is what they're saying. If you listen to the confirmation or the hearings with Ketanji Brown Jackson, talking about undoing the decisions over birth control, over abortion, over it's insane the world that they're talking about bringing us, David.
It is, and that's why the smart ones like Mitch McConnell and the Koch brothers basically say, don't talk about it. We can do this in state houses, which is what they're doing. The main front pushing all this stuff, the attacks on women, banning books, you name it, the attacks on public schools, privatizing everything. It's almost entirely been done in the state house. Why? One, it gets little attention versus Rick Scott bragging about it. And two, these state houses are so gerrymandered the way we talked about, where not a single member faces a competitive election. Even though these things are deeply unpopular, they could pass them and never lose. One way to think about it, would they be so dead set on gerrymandering if they had confidence that a majority of people agreed with their views? No, they wouldn't need to gerrymander. They would just say, look what we did, reelect us. They know that, I'm sure you have a lot of friends in Ohio with a variety of views on guns, right? 90% of gun owners in Ohio and support background checks. When they get rid of all that stuff, they're with 10% of the people. So the reason they gerrymander is because they can do these deeply unpopular things that represent a deep minority, but they don't worry about getting reelected. You can't do that in Washington. You can't do that as a mayor. But state houses, because of the intense gerrymandering and the ability to cordon off all your members from any election, that's where they do it. So that's why Mitch McConnell says, we don't need to do much in Washington except lower taxes and put judges through. Leave most of the dirty and unpopular work to states where no one can no one's paying attention. And even if they figure it out, they can't do anything about it anyway.
That's an excellent point.
The smart ones know, the Koch brothers know that their worldview is unpopular, and that's why they go to states to get it done.
Yeah, and that's why they don't talk a lot. Last question, where do you see this going? I mean, obviously, like I said, you're going to have 2 primaries. Is that going to happen?
Yeah, there will be 2 primaries. It is a total waste of money, tens of millions of dollars. That's all the fault of the legislators and people like Governor DeWine and LaRose, the Secretary of State. The question is, there will be a second primary. My guess is it will be in August. It'll be only the state house members. My hope, and it's a little bit of a long shot at this point, I'm afraid to say. I hope not. My hope is that also has a constitutional congressional map on that primary as well. Getting from here to there is not clear how that would happen yet. But what they have been trying to do literally for a year is to force a primary on an unconstitutional map that violates your Constitution. My view of that, and as a lawyer, is the Constitution is the foundation of your power. If you're elected on a map that's unconstitutional, how are you legally exercising power as a member of Congress? Why are voters stuck in a district that we all know is unconstitutional? So if I were a judge, I would say, and I'm not a judge, but I would say, I don't care when we strike down your map. The moment we strike it down, it means you are not a legitimate member of Congress. So let's get that primary and let's get that congressional map in the August primary as well. They are trying to run the clock out and literally force an election on a map that violates the Constitution. I don't see how that works, but that's their game plan. So a second primary, at least, the question is what will be on that primary ballot.
It'll be interesting to see, and I'm sure you'll come back and let us know. I appreciate the time, Absolutely. David. Great stuff.
Thank you.
Good stuff. David Pepper, former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. You got any questions, comments, make sure you do that. Also, if you're just joining us, make sure you grab the podcast. Always there for your entertainment, your enjoyment. You can get that from iTunes to iHeart, Stitcher to Podbean, and everywhere in between. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Thanks, David. Appreciate it. That was great. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Often, Southern states are the focus of histories of slavery in the United States. But did you know that in the early 1700s, 1 in 5 residents of New York were enslaved Africans? New York merchants had a trading relationship with the Caribbean, which had a large enslaved population. This brought enslaved people to New York. But since there were no large plantations in the colony, most of these enslaved people worked as carpenters, fishermen, or stonemasons. On this day in labor history, the year was 1712. A group of 20 to 70 enslaved Africans armed themselves with guns, swords, and hatchets. They set fire to a building in the center of town, attacking the white settlers who tried to put the fire out. The armed insurrection killed 9 white settlers and injured several more before the militia arrived. As many as 70 enslaved and free black people were arrested for the revolt. Several chose to commit suicide rather than go to trial. More than 20 were executed. Most were hung, and a few were burned at the stake. The revolt resulted in the passage of tougher slave codes. Enslaved people were forbidden from carrying weapons or meeting in groups of 3 or more. Punishments could include whipping. For the next 150 years, this pattern repeated. Slave uprisings in the United States would be followed by brutal repression and a tightening of slave codes. In New York, slavery remained legal until 1799. Even then, New York only adopted an act for the gradual abolition of slavery. This meant that those enslaved before July 4th, 1799 would remain in bondage. slavery was not fully eradicated in New York until 1841. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So like we were saying, look, Republicans are trying to move this country in their fantasy land, in conservative, crazy, zealot, right-wing fantasy land. And one of the things is, I've been saying this for years, women barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, gays back in the closet, and blacks back in the fields. The original intent, folks. Only white landowning males over 21 being able to vote, the way it used to be. And, the power and control of the handfuls. And, they're really legislatively, as David said, doing everything in their power to move in a direction that in the states, because they're big tenthers, right? States' rights. Pushing bad ideas. And I look at Oklahoma. Their state house on Tuesday just passed overwhelmingly, massively, like 70-14, an anti-abortion bill that would, make it illegal to perform any abortion, any, make it a felony, 10 years in prison. It really is quite amazing what they're doing with this stuff. And there have been some stuff, talking about killing people, actually killing people for having an abortion, without the other side of this. Now I've said, look, if you want to make abortion illegal, then how do we encourage people to say, okay, well then, if you're going to make it illegal, how do we take care of those children that you're now forcing to be born? Now, how are you then going to ensure that there isn't the next set of consequences? Don't care. Pro-birth people. It's about punishment. That's what it's about. Because they're also simultaneously, and this is the weird part, they're also simultaneously going after contraception, which is freaking weird to me. Because if you're anti-abortion, wouldn't the best way to stop abortions is stop people from getting pregnant? Just a thought. Also, simultaneously, while we're talking about remaking the country in their conservative, crazy, zealot world, I look at Tennessee, where their state legislature just passed a piece of legislation, I guess, lowering the age of consent to get married. And this is one of those weird things where you go, wait a second. Evidently, they're saying that, according to the report, it would give an alternative form of marriage to those pastors or other individuals who have an objection to the current pathway to marriage in our law. Because the last governor raised it to a legal age, and they're saying no, you're this isn't right. Now, what's interesting is there is a state senator, a state representative. His name is Rose. John Rose. He was born in 1965, which makes him about 56 years old. Great, interesting story because someone sent the articles. His wife graduated in 2007, I'd say she was born about, 89, 90? So there's about a 25-year age difference. The difference here, though, is that she was awarded the Rose Scholarship. Yes, while she was in high school, she was awarded the Rose Scholarship, his scholarship. I'm not making this up. That helped her go to college, and I guess there's a picture of her with the governor getting this Rose Scholarship, and there's an article with him. This is the kind of scary, creepy stuff that you go, is this the future? Is this where these people are going to take things? Where now you're talking about trolling grounds for the real groomers. I mean, the right wing is loving to use the word groomer, and they're going, oh, see, the left's. We've got a groomer right here, And yet, nobody on the right seems to see the irony in what they're doing. Wow. Like I say, when they're pointing their finger at you, it's because they're doing it. And that's the scary part of what's going on in this country. Just my thoughts. Love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Share your thoughts. If you miss any of the show, always grab the podcast, share it with your friends and neighbors, coworkers, all of that. It's always available at thericksmithshow.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you follow us on social media. Thanks for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.